Okay, so today we're going to focus just on how to read visual text, and each week the workshops will focus on a different skill that you need, and we'll be going through examples and showing you how to write for this section. Section 1 of the exam is the hardest one, and people are still scoring the lowest across the state. So it's not just you guys, it's across the state, people are scoring the lowest. So the first thing that comes out when waste markers are marking this section is that students don't know enough conventions to talk about. And we're going to look at how you can talk about more conventions even when it seems the question's only setting you up to talk about a few. So some of the visual conventions are things like composition, which is basically everything in the frame and how it's arranged in the frame. It's also known as mise-en-scene. But if it asks for things like arrangement, which one of the images we'll look at today did for the 2017 waste, it asked about the word arrangement. That just means everything within the scene. So every kind of convention you can have. There's also a familiar one that your English teacher would have taught you since the beginning of time, which would be SWOT, which stands for symbolic, written, audio and technical. But of course, this is a still image, so you're not going to be talking about any audio. So amongst symbolic codes, you have things like character. So even if it's a real person, we can still talk about them in terms of character. And then you've got to step that out to everything that character is doing. So what they wear, so what they carry, as in props, what their body language is, what their gaze is, posture, that comes out of body language, and so on and so forth. So, and then facial expression. So all of these things give us hints about what's going on in the image. Then you've got setting is also a symbolic aspect. And you've got to ask yourself, and in one of the examples from last year's we're going to go into, you've got to ask yourself everything that's in the setting. And I'll give you a little technique for sort of mapping the setting out with your eyes and drawing down everything you see, because a lot of people are missing stuff to talk about because they're not seeing everything within the image. And then you've also got things like they could just be symbolic objects, like signs, logos, even things like one of the ones we're going to look at now, it was symbolic, the shirt that one of the characters was wearing, because he wore a tie-dyed shirt, and that was symbolic of, you know, the hippie era, free love and relaxation. So there's often a lot of hidden signs within images that we're not reading as well. The word colour is listed there, but of course all of your images are in grayscale because it's too expensive to reproduce that many exams in colour. So don't really talk about colour, but you can talk about light and dark if it's meaningful for the image being analysed. Lastly, you've got juxtaposition when things within the frame contrast each other. And that's like when you put things like last semester's exam, we had an image from the Science magazine, and it had the image of a skull in a cup. So that was juxtaposition, and because there was a cup of water, which usually symbolises life, and then there was a skull in it, which symbolises death. So that's when you have two things that are really contrasting. Like you might have a skull and a rose. One symbolises love and passion, one symbolises death. So juxtaposition is when you have that contrast between two things. There's also, in the technical aspects, you've got things like the basics are the camera angles and the camera shot. Angles we have low, medium, and high. So medium is your default. That's how we look at most people, unless you're short like me and everything's a low angle. But medium is how we look eye level. So that's where we say that's even to us. That means that they're equal. So low is when the camera's low. So people often mix this up. They say, oh, low when it's looking low, but it's where the camera is. So low is the camera's low, high is the camera's high. So low makes something look larger, more powerful. High makes something look weaker, more insignificant. Then the camera shot, you have the three basics are close, medium and long. But then you've got extremes. You've got extreme close-ups when it just shows perhaps an eye. You can have medium close-ups, which are sort of not quite the full upper body, but they might be from shoulders up. And you can have extreme long, which can also be establishing shots, like of a setting and that. So to memorise these, you should be doing brainstorms of these and putting them all over your walls in your bedrooms and maybe even finding examples of them. You've got to get these down pat. Also in technical, you have the framing, the composition, or whatever you want to call it, the arrangement. That all comes under technical. You also have things like leading lines or vectors, some teachers call them. Doesn't matter what you call them. And that's basically where things are arranged in a certain way to make our eyes lead and follow. And you've got special effects, superimposing, all sorts of other things. Can anyone think of anything else that I've missed or that your teacher may talk about? No? Okay. All right, so if you go in knowing all of those, you're immediately going to open yourself up to more marks. So people are not getting the marks because they're not showing the knowledge of the text. And we're going to go through a couple of these texts and I'm going to show you how much is in these texts, but how little was pulled out by other responders in previous years. The next thing in this section is they don't want too much written. Don't try and write 3 pages per response. You're wasting time. 200 to 300 words. In this section, I always tell my students to do a format like this. Make a statement from the text. So basically that would be a statement about a convention that you can see. Then actually give the example from the text and then state what the effect is and tie it back to the question idea. So in this section, the questions, there are either 2 types of questions. They can be conventions-based or ideas-based. So, for example, a question in the 2016 WACE was, explain how an attitude towards mining is expressed through a use of specific textual feature. So it says a specific there. So a lot of people thought, oh, okay, I can only talk about one thing. And they started talking about the use of statistics. Pretty bland and boring. There was so much more to that text than just statistics. So they lost out on a lot of ways of showing their knowledge. So they could have said that that specific textual feature was rhetorical devices or persuasive devices. They didn't have to limit themselves to one. They could have actually said all devices that are connected to the audience sense of pathos or ethos or logos, which are the 3 Greek terms for how we feel when we are given persuasive text. So if you see here, this question here asks to do, obviously to know about text. They all want to know about how texts work. That's what this section's about. And then it's based around the idea, which is an attitude towards mining. So it wants you to show how that idea is conveyed. Other questions might just seem a bit broader. They might say, what is wrong with the future that's been created by our society? So this question asks just to look at ideas, and then, of course, you have to show how those ideas are conveyed through the textual conventions. So in the types of questions, you probably want to aim for a couple of paragraphs. Now, there is no set way of writing in this section, but I advise all the time to write in this way that I'm going to show you. I always say, do a thesis statement. This is where you basically rephrase the question and you state what conventions you're going to talk about. These questions to these texts are often on another page of the exam. So the questions will be at the front of the exam, and then you flip through to look at the text. So what I find is that if people restate the question in the thesis statement, it gets it in their head. So last year's exam is a prime example of this. The question asked, what does it say about human nature? People went straight into writing and started writing about Mother Nature because the image had a tornado in it. If they'd written a thesis statement and made themselves rewrite that word, human nature, they might have caught themselves in that mistake. So a thesis statement is a really good guide for yourself to say, this is what I'm going to talk about. Then I always say do 2 paragraphs. And usually the 2 paragraphs will either be 2 different convention types, or it might be on 2 different ideas. And you'll understand that more as I go through these examples. All right, so this was from the 2017 Waste, this image below. It was from a film called Me, Earl and the Dying Girl. I should have included that on the top. Whenever they give you a visual text, they always give you context. Now, the range of responses that were produced to this text were amazing and very funny. In fact, 2 Willetton Senior High School students on the day of the exam walked out of their WACE exam, sat on the steps out there, one kid with African kid and one white kid. They sat opposite each other like this on the stairs and posted to SCARS's website, analyse this. So they were probably one of the thousands of people across the state that read this as a racial tension between the 2 characters. All right. A lot of students across the state read this as 2 students having a racial disagreement. To me, the title told me it all. Me, Earl, and the Dying Girl. The title gives so many clues to what's going on. It says, how is your response influenced by the visual elements in the frame? So visual elements just means everything. What's missing right in the middle there? Again, straight to the point. There's obviously the dying girl is what's missing. So most people, they said, yes, my response was that these 2 friends, they've fallen out, they've had a disagreement, and they went straight into that aspect. So they went straight into your response, which is good. That's the first thing you should do. What am I going to do to answer this question? I'm going to say what my response is. My response is, that these friends are struggling to communicate. All right, but people weren't marked wrong for saying it was a racial disagreement, by the way, because when you have an open question like that, explain how your response, we can't mark you wrong for responding in that way. All right, so it's not a bad thing to say that's my response. But it was obvious that the people that took note of the fact that it was about me, Earl, and the dying girl were able to get so much more from this text. They were able to see that there was there's so much broader range of understandings to be taken from it. So whenever it says your response can be anything. You could say, I'm happy by this, but you have to be able to back it up with evidence. So after we say the first part of the question, we say, right, what am I going to say about my response? Then we have to go to the other part of the question. So we have to look at the conventions that we're going to discuss. So let's annotate all over this. So we have, for the setting, So obviously a living room or some kind of room. Now, some people said it was a principal's office. I don't know about you, but I've never been to my principal and he's had a couch in there and some toys for me to play with. But it doesn't really matter. But it's a room, okay? There are toys. Let's just annotate all over. There's bookshelves behind it, full of books. Some very clever people who have much better eyesight than me noticed that there was history books. I actually had people that were reading these titles about history and that and linking it to racial segregation. So I thought, wow. But I felt like they didn't really need to do that. So you've got the idea that there's a lot of books, there's history books, there's some toys. So you get the idea that perhaps this is a living room. There's a couch, and typically there's obviously a little table there that he's got his arm on. Typically a couch is often facing a TV when it's sat like that. So you could assume that they're sitting there in a living room facing the TV or whatever. That's the first thing, that's the setting. Technical aspects. It's a medium long shot. It's at eye level, which helps us get close to them and see them as equal. And then we go on to the characters. So we have two people. We have one boy, he's obviously, I'd say, African American, or African English. I don't know where it's set actually, it's probably set in America. He's wearing a bucket hat and a tie-dye shirt. His body language. And this is where it becomes important because we get everything by these two characters' body language. He's got his arm holding his head. He's slumped over. He's disinterested. And seems, he's not engaging with the character next to him. And we can see as well his gaze, his eyes are doing that sort of typical teenage roll. His eyes are like not gazing at us, so he's not connecting with us. So when someone gazes at us, that makes us close to them. So him gazing away means we're not connecting as much. And he seems to be, doing a bit of an eye roll, like, a bit of an attitude, like, I don't want to be here, is what that conveys. The other boy is Caucasian, wearing a black band type T-shirt. Some people even knew the band and said it was sort of, not a band, or like a show, Nostafaro, which is some kind of conspiracy thing. So they were like, oh, he's like out there. And again, he's got similar body language. He looks bored, but he's gazing at us, or really through us, actually. He's not connecting with us. He sort of seems to be gazing into space. So we can tell from that, without needing any audio, these guys are not communicating. They're not talking. They're not interacting. There's this distance between them. This distance that sort of seems wide and hard to get over. And this is what creates the tension. Some people said this guy's got his arm out, which could symbolise that he is reaching out to his friend and trying to bridge that distance, whereas this guy's body language is more like, nah, don't want to know, don't want to talk to you. Okay? So as you can see there, and I tell everyone they should be annotating in this section, look at how much stuff I've got to write about now. If you give yourself a bit of extra time in this section of the exam and take a little bit of time off your third section, which doesn't need as much writing as the second section and doesn't need as much thinking and planning as this first, you can, if you give yourself 70 minutes in this section, that gives you 23 minutes per response, which gives you 3 minutes to do this annotating. Now, obviously, it's taken me a bit longer now because I've talked it out, but you have to get really good at just annotating. And that's what you guys need to keep doing. You need to keep getting visual text and just annotating all over, constantly getting a new visual text and annotating it and annotating it, getting into that habit of pulling as much as you can out of it. And that gives you 20 minutes to write. Now, if you look here, you can see quite clearly how much I now have to write. And I'm going to show you how I would write this on the spot. I'm going to model writing it and you guys can do the same. So you can see in the table below, I've often used these tables with people to help show them how to scaffold this response. So for the response, the two key things that you're wanting to be doing is looking at the technique or the convention. And then the other part is looking at the idea that's being asked about. So in this question, the idea is your response and the conventions are everything in the visual frame. So then I said it makes sense for me to talk about two different things. One, I would talk all about the setting and the characters. So I would talk all about the symbolic aspects in paragraph 1. And in paragraph 2, I would talk all about the technical aspects that construct that idea. So my response is going to be, I'm going to look at their gaze and I'm going to look at their facial expression, their characters, the clothing, their body language, the setting in the bookshelf, to talk about how it makes me respond with sympathy for the two boys who have obviously lost their friendship due to the dying girl, due to the loss of the dying girl. And it's caused a rift in their friendship and it's divided them. And in the second paragraph, I'm going to talk about how all those technical aspects lead me to the same idea. All right, and I'm going to model that now. You guys have got spare pages in the backs of these books. So I'll go to one now. All right. So you guys can try this now. So a thesis statement is basically you say what you're going to talk about. So I'm going to say text 1. Now you don't have to say the whole text name as well in these responses. So text 1, I will put in brackets me, Earl, because so you know what it's about. Text 1 uses camera shot, angle, and framing. So yeah, you guys can come along and copy what I'm writing or, you know, do your own. Uses camera shot, angle, and framing to portray Okay, text. So this is my thesis statement. Sorry, it looks really long, but it's only 2 sentences. Text 1, me, Earl, and the dying girl uses camera shot angle and framing to portray two characters who have lost their friend. The visual elements cause me to sympathise with the two boys whose loss has fractured the friendship. Now, I've just done this on the spot. It's not my best thesis statement ever. I haven't talked about costuming and all the rest of it either, but I've conveyed to the marker what I'm going to talk about, and I've let myself know that's my goal. So then I would talk in paragraph 1, and obviously you wouldn't have a heading paragraph 1. I'm going to talk about all the symbolic aspects. So the two boys, okay, so I've just written that off the top of my head. Now you'll see that I haven't included all the things that I wrote about. The two boys, the dark-skinned African and the Caucasian boy, sit on the couch in a busy living room full of books. Despite being in a home environment, the two sit far apart on the couch, separated by distance and by obvious tension. The body language and gaze of the characters reflects their anger for each other. The boy on the left has his head on his arm and is rolling his eyes. The boy on the right is gazing beyond us, obviously angry and unwilling to communicate. The fact that the two boys are placed in a living room shows they were obviously friends previously, but a rift has occurred, probably caused due to the death of the girl in the film's title. Then the next one I would go on to talk about the framing. So the arrangement, and I'm following on from that idea of the two in the frame emphasises the space between them. And I probably should have tied back to my response. And that's why I always say to my students as well, leave a gap. After your first paragraph, leave a couple of lines, 2 or 3 lines gap, so you can add in, you can go back and go, oh, I didn't talk about my response, and that's a key part of the question. So you can go back and then say, oh, this makes me respond with sadness and hope that they repair their friendship. Try not to write down the sides because they cut your exams when they put them in the scanners this year. So never write down the sides of your exams and go right over the bottom because it will get cut off. So just use the lines given to you. So that's why if you have a space, it's good. So the arrangement of the two in the frame emphasises the space between them, a space that I assume, and you can use the word I and personal voice in this. In fact, they want your personal voice. So it's where I put where I assume is where the dying girl sat. And you can even relate it to your own life. So you could say, I have been yeah. Okay, now that's not completely finished, but in the second paragraph, I've made sure I've gone more back to my response and I've made sure I've talked about framing and technical aspects. So let's go through and do a checklist of my answer. So I'm going to highlight in pink any time that I've answered the idea, which was my response, and I'm going to highlight in yellow any time that I've done any conventions. Okay, so I've named the characters. Sit on a couch in a busy living. I've done the setting. I've done the setting again. I've done where they're sitting in the picture. I've done the distance. I've done the obvious tension caused by the body language and gaze. So you can see here, now I don't know if your teachers ever do this revision policy, but I always say to people, when you get your exams back, get a highlighter out and go through your responses in the exams and highlight every single time you mention a convention. If you've ever had an exam marked by me, you would have seen, like, I've done that for you. I've marked all over it with highlighter. Hey, look how much highlighter I've got on my page already. Every single sentence I've included evidence. I haven't wasted time doing a big, long, flowery intro. I haven't wasted time at all. I've gone straight into, this is how much I know about visual text. And again, I'm still going. All right, so then I go into my response. I felt that obviously friends and a rift has occurred. This makes me respond with sadness and hope. All right, going back, second paragraph, I've talked about the arrangement of the two in the frame. I've talked about the space. I go back to talking about my response. I've then given a bit of personal voice. I talked about my own experience. I've gone back to then more conventions. And then finished on ideas. That is enough for you to write. You don't need to write lots. Okay, let's go through a few more texts, and then I want to leave you guys with a few of these to do. Oh, I've got to go back up. A few of these that you can do by yourself and give to me to have a look after we do this workshop. All right. So that was the first one. That was the 2017 exam. Here's another one. How does the text below create a representation of today's army? So the how is the conventions. It's not specifying which one. And then the idea is representation of today's army. And let's annotate. So we have 4 characters. He's obviously a, what do you call those people? Bomb diffusion specialist? Bomb squad, yep. That would have been easier to write. He's carrying a nice big bomb. We have obviously an officer. This guy's wearing some kind of parachute thing, so he's obviously jumping out of planes. What do you call that? Paratrooper. And then we have a female. All right, so she's of Asian descent. He seems of Middle Eastern descent. He is obviously African American. And he is, it's hard to know, I don't know, he looks a bit Latino to me. All right, so what does this tell us? When we think, we have to know our contextual knowledge for a lot of this stuff. When you get something like this, you have to think, what did I used to see in the past when I saw an army ad? All men, all white, all big, strong, buff men. It was the same thing. So it says today's army. So it's saying, what are they saying about today's army in this image? They're saying today's army is diverse in terms of race and gender. It's saying that anyone is welcome. So these are the things that it's saying that's different. What is it saying that is the same? It's saying you have to have strength. So if you look at these people, they've all got direct gazes. Now, gaze in most traditional texts like advertising, men gaze at us, men gaze into the distance, women gaze into the short field. All right, women, our eyes don't seem to work properly when we're in a makeup ad, and we have this stupid simpering, I don't know where I'm looking, gaze. All right, this woman is quite unique and she's gazing right into our eyes. All right, and if you go through a magazine and look at a lot of those advertisements, you won't see a woman gazing at you like that selling makeup. All right, because makeup, they want you to think of women as soft. They want you to think of them as delicate. So even though this woman is obviously a woman, she is still portraying this idea of masculine strength, masculinity. She is, her gaze is strong, and all of their gazes are strong, direct, powerful, and they're sort of saying to us, you know, we are proud of who we are. And it's almost trying to say, we will protect you. So it's still saying the same thing that the army has always tried to convey, this idea of the hero. We'll be the hero for you. You can see here that the African-American man, there's the choice of him as the commander is obviously very important, because they want to say that race will not define you in our army. And they wanted to show by having an African-American man that, you know, anyone can be the leader. And that's reinforced as well by the fact that his jaw, he's sort of got his head tilted up. He's, you know, standing proud and strong, and his, you know, jaw is all firm and looking very manly. They've all got their sort of chests pushed out. You know, they've got that typical hero posture, and they're standing strong. You've then also got, you've got the indistinct background, because they're showing it's not important. It doesn't matter where you perhaps come from, that could be suggesting. The indistinct background almost has like a cloudy look as well, so you could analyse that. And you could also look at how the light hits their faces. So all of their faces, there's light there, there's light there, there's light there, there's light there, there's less light there, but the light's shining on them. So traditionally, whenever you have light shining on people, it's almost like, you know, a beacon of hope. It represents hope and, you know, the idea that these people are your saviours. So how is today's army being represented? It's being represented as diverse in gender and race. It's been represented as a place which welcomes anybody. How is it the same? It's still representing that the army is strong. They are heroes. They are there for your benefit. They will defend you in your time of need, and they are something that we value as well. So the whole thing is that we're supposed to value it, all right, which not everyone does. A lot of people don't agree with armies and wars and things. So it's trying to send this message that the army is something to respect and want to like. Look at the bottom strip as well here. It's set up like an almost like an internet sort of feed. So it's got send a message, add to friends, forward to friend, add to favourites down the bottom. And even the logo there, Army Strong. Very direct, telling you we are strong because we're in the army. So that internet feed and that sort of, what do you call it when you have the bar down the bottom, like a toolbar or whatever? That is showing as well that the new army is all into, you know, the future and things. Like they've done it almost like a Facebook thing, add to friend and things like that. So they're showing that they are sort of modern as well and looking to the future. So it's trying to engage with a younger audience, people your age, in fact. So I've given the table there that you guys can transcribe your notes into to do a practice at another time. And you can write up a practice to that. The next one was a Ray-Band one. I'm just going to skip past that for a sec because I wanted to go into the last one from last year's exam, which wasn't done well. Now, typically images are the strongest part of this section 1. Typically, we expect students are better at it. You guys are better at reading images than you are reading narratives and other texts. But it's not coming across. You're not showing those strengths. You're not showing you know all these techniques. And the other thing is people are latching onto really, really weird elements. And so let's analyse this one and we'll look at what people really focused on. So first of all, you've got to look at the question, how does text 1 work to convey an idea about human nature? So we need to talk about all the things in the text, but then, of course, the key part is this human. So this human is in shorts and t-shirt. He's mowing his lawn. He looks pretty relaxed and casual. He's wearing his sunglasses. Doesn't seem bothered at all. That's why this image went viral and became a meme all across the world. Because this guy seems to be mowing his lawn while right behind him in the distance is this huge tornado that looks like it's about to rip him apart. The reality is it was actually a dust tornado and it was heading away from them. And you can see that by the fact that this tree is not bending wildly. However, people saw this image and went, what does that say about the world? And that's where the question came from. What does it say about human nature? We are not going to let ourselves be turned away from what we want to do. We're stubborn and so on and so forth. All right, what about the setting? So we have a backyard setting. Very everyday. Most of us have a backyard. We have a tree, we have a bush, and we have a bit of lawn. We have a fence that creates leading lines separating two parts of this image. So this image is clearly split in two sections. This section is the human domain. This is where this section, we've controlled nature, we've fenced it, we've organised it, and we're even trimming it. From the fence up, nature's doing whatever it wants. And you can see that the major part of the image is the sky. So when you're looking at the composition, you need to note that the main part of this scene is the sky and then the tornado that dominates it. Our eyes are immediately drawn to the tornado. So you would say, and a lot of people like to say this word, that is the salient object. So salient just means the most important. It is the most important image in this frame. Our eyes go straight to the tornado and our eyes follow the tornado up into the sky. That's our immediate reaction, is to follow the circles. We follow the pattern of the wind. But then we go back down and we see this shrubby little tree, a tiny little yard, and this tiny little insignificant man mowing his lawn. And he does look insignificant when you compare him to the size of the massive tornado coming towards him. So immediately you can see that I've got two paragraphs I can instantly write here. One all about the symbolic elements, two all about the technical elements. Now, what people seem to get really fixated on was this man wearing his glasses and walking, mowing his lawn in his sunglasses. And he showed that he didn't care because he was wearing shorts and a t-shirt. Most people tend to just wear shorts and a t-shirt or something casual to mow their lawn. It's not like he made a deliberate choice and went, right, I'm getting my casual clothes on while I go out to go stand in front of a tornado. All right, he was just wearing shorts and a t-shirt. So it was weird that people got fixated on what he was wearing. He was wearing sunglasses because it's bright, all right? Most of us wear sunglasses. It wasn't, oh my gosh, this big prop, his pair of sunglasses just show how casual he is. So a lot of people got obsessed with that sort of factor, whereas really you need to get more obsessed in what is he doing? He's mowing his lawn when there's a massive tornado behind him. So what does that say about human nature? It's not just what he's doing, but what has he done to the nature in his yard? So what he has done is, and that's where you can say in the technical elements, the leading lines of the fence show that humans want to contain nature, confine it, control it. The man Thunis, that was his name. So all you really need to say about him is he's casually mows the lawn, trying to enforce order upon the nature in his yard while in the So I would talk about that aspect. So my one convention I'm talking about there is I'm talking about leading lines, I'm talking about the fence, so I'm talking about the setting too, and I'm talking about how the fence is confining and controlling. I'm also talking about his body language when I say casually mows the lawn. Don't really need to say much more. I've summed it all up in the word casually. I don't need to say he's wearing shorts and a t-shirt and sunglasses showing he's casual. It's pretty obvious. And the fact that he's mowing the lawn shows the order. So all of that is answering the ideas. So I'm saying, this is what I'm saying about human nature. We try to order it. We want to force it. Then I would go on and talk about the top part. So the top part of the frame. All right, and you would go on and do those thoughts. The first one, symbolic elements. You could talk about, like I said, it's not really important to talk about his clothing and that, but you could talk about the fact that nature seems to be quite dying. Like his lawn looks very messy. So the trees are very scraggly. There's not a lot of lushness to it. So it's almost like suggesting that when we try to force nature to do what we want, we end up killing it. And then my pen can't keep up with my mouth. And then we can talk about how the tornado is sort of like this sign that just as much as human nature tries to human nature is arrogant. We think we can control nature. And this image is sort of telling us, hey, no, you can't. So some clever people tied it to sort of a bit of global warming, you know, showing that nature will fight back. If you think to last year, the text Storyland was all about nature fighting back. We tried to control it, we tried to ruin it, we tried to kill it and force it to do things because that's in our human nature. Our human nature is the arrogance. And this image shows what happens when Mother Nature decides to turn around and say, I don't care what you want, humans, you're going to lose because I'm more powerful. And that's what this whole text is about. It's about the power of nature.